Okay, Chair.
All righty, we will go ahead and get started. Everybody, welcome to the April 23rd Transportation Commission virtual meeting. If we could go ahead and have a roll call.
Commissioner Javindel.
Present.
Commissioner Jordan.
Present.
Commissioner McCroskey.
Present.
Commissioner Del Rosario.
Present.
Chair Paulson.
Here. Okay, so the first item on the agenda will be public comments. This is the public's opportunity to comment on items not on the agenda. We ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Do we have anyone who would like to comment or provide public comment on items not on the agenda? I am not seeing any, or is that be Anne? Can you confirm? All righty. So we will go ahead then and move on to presentations. The first presentation, 3-1, monthly police data on collisions and citations.
There we go. Everyone see that? Okay. Thank you, Chair. For the police data, we're reporting on February and March. In both February and March, there were 0 pedestrian collisions. There were 0 bike collisions in both months. The vehicle collisions saw 1 injury collision in each month, with 11 total collisions in February and a drop down to 4 collisions reported in March. Moving citations were 47 in February, and then the drop down to 16 in March. And maybe not entirely surprising, 4 DUI arrests in February and a drop down to 0 in March. So we're starting to see dramatic decrease in collisions and citations corresponding to drop in vehicle use. That concludes my report.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, does anybody have questions, comments? I'm not.
End the share screen.
Oh, sorry. Robert, go ahead.
It'd be interesting to see, and I can take the information, or the commission can take the information offline or next month, if the citations or any of the collisions involved were due to speeding, and if speeding played a larger role in the data than in previous months.
Any other commissioner comments? I don't see any. And do we have any public comments on this item? I am not seeing any. So let's go ahead. Oh, Ken, yes.
So I'm just wondering if we have any Main Street traffic surveys from the past that we could compare a current survey against. Not that we're going to go out and do a survey, so I guess that's not kind of moot. Never mind.
All righty, so I think that we can go ahead and move on to item 3-2, shared mobility data.
Bear with me. For gig car share reporting, this also covers 2 months. In February, their membership was 338 and declined to 257 in March. And trip rates also declined, starts and stops in February in the 730s and declined down to 502 and 527 in March. They did increase their fleet due to purchases that they had been making previously. So the fleet for the Albany down through Berkeley, Oakland whole service area rose from 440 vehicles in February up to 508 in March, and continued to average 7 vehicles per day in Albany. That concludes that report.
Great, thank you. Commissioner, questions or comments? Anyone? I'm not seeing any. So the attendees, I'm seeing a hand on the attendees. Anne?
It's Amy. Hi, it's Amy Smolin.
Okay, great.
Just wondering, since car share is sort of something that people wouldn't want to really do in the time of COVID, what gig car, what measures they've taken to clean cars or disinfect, or what they've been doing in this COVID situation?
Sure, they have upped their cleaning and they've kept city staff informed about their change in practices. So they've spent more of their staff resources on increased cleaning and maintenance of the vehicles. And so they have asked the cities within that they serve to be more relaxed on the 72-hour limitation, and that they may have more instances of cars parked longer than 72 hours because staff that is often utilized to move vehicles around have been reallocated to cleaning vehicles. That's been their main operational change, but they have seen a rather large decline in use as well.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other public comment? I'm not seeing any. And there was no commissioner comments. So I think that we can go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda, and it's the consent calendar. Item 4-1, Traffic and Safety Commission meeting minutes for February 27th. Does anybody have any comments on this, or, okay, Preston?
Yeah, since I had to recuse myself from one of the items, I won't move approval or not, but I did notice that I think it was the first bullet under commission comments. Under the last item or second to last item was the item having to do with the sugar sweetened beverage tax expenditure recommendations, seeming to indicate that the commission did not support spending funding on water bottle filling stations, which to my memory is not actually, I think, what was put forward. I think what we asked was, has that program been completed such that if one viewed that part of the spending as sort of a capital part of the program as opposed to ongoing expenditure, that if that was completed, then maybe we could repurpose that capital spending on other sorts of capital projects, which we then ended up including in our recommendations. So I didn't want to come across as saying the commission, was opposed to water bottle filling stations. And I don't think that is, in fact, was our stance.
That was my understanding as well.
Yeah, we can review the language and make sure to reflect that.
So are there any other comments? Do we have a motion to approve?
I move that we approve the minutes as amended.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Okay. So we will go ahead and move on to item 5-1, plans for Washington Avenue pavement project. And I am guessing that staff has a presentation on this.
Yes, this is Robert. So let me see if I can share this screen here. Is that being shared? Can you guys see this? Try to share the screen. All right, can you guys see the memo now?
We see a file folder on your screen.
Oh, okay. I'm on the other screen. All right, let's move it over here. How's that?
Looks good.
Yeah.
Okay. So I shared this as part of the packet. I'm not going to go through the entire presentation, but I do want to focus on the tables. So in between the time that staff brought the Transportation Commission the preliminary design, we had some improvements. We had some changes into the drawings. We presented those to council. So that was in the city council package for March, and we wanted to bring those changes to you and for discussion. So some of the issues that were resolved by the drawings and specifications that were shown to council but didn't get shared with you was that the 444 crosswalks have been included. The stop bars were also included. We eliminated the wedges in the curb ramps, which were a big part of the discussion and which were a big part of the comments back from this body to staff. We eliminated bulb outs on the east side of Masonic, and we are going to have part of the discussion. I'll bring up the bulb outs on the west side. Excuse me, let's flip that. We eliminated the bulb outs on the west side, and part of this discussion today will be discussion of the bulb outs on the east side of Masonic at the Greenway. We eliminated the unpermitted encroachment at Stanage. I had a conversation with the owner of that property. They have no problems with the proposed improvements to move their, I guess like a planter box, redwood planter box into their property and off the public right-of-way. And we also incorporated a stormwater retention area, which you can see on the drawings now. Some of the issues that were not incorporated into the drawings, but we plan to incorporate these either into the drawings or into the specifications. The high friction truncated dome mats, that was an issue brought up by this body. It is specified in the design. It is specified by specification in writing, so it doesn't really have a place on the drawings, but we use the Caltrans standard, which has a specific high friction coefficient. So there's a dry and wet coefficient. Both of them are stipulated in the specs. And then the line of travel, the commission recommended installation of modified C or KC hybrid ramps at the following locations, and we're going to go ahead and modify the design to reflect this. Talbot on the southeast corner, Talbot on the southwest corner, Evelyn on the southeast corner, and Evelyn on the southwest corner. Also is going to be the key route intersection southbound in the northwest corner and southbound in the southwest corner. All of those will be reflected in the revised drawings. We don't have a revised set of drawings to show you guys. The set that I incorporated in the package is the same one that went as part of the package to council and then got pulled from the last meeting. After tonight's discussion, we'll take any comments this body has and the comments that I just talked about, that I just outlined, and we'll take those back to the designer and incorporate all of these. So my hope is that at the end of this, we'll have a good design set that we can agree on to take back to our design consultant. So some of the issues that I wanted to have a conversation about, discussion and some clarification are the ones shown on the on this table here. Just reduce this a little bit. So Masonic Southeast and Masonic Northeast. These are with the comment that was received was that the width of the ramp is not consistent with the width of the path. And I wanted to make sure I understood this. I'm going to go down to the drawings. So this is the alignment as shown at Masonic. This is the modified C on the northwest side, and another modified C on the southwest side. We're trying to get these in alignment with the existing curb ramps on the right side. These are very large curb ramps, and they've given us some challenges. We've gone out there and measured the slopes at the top of these ramps and all along the ramp, the body of the ramp. And we've seen that some of these are already out of compliance. We're going to have to be doing some improvements to bring some of this into compliance. We're hoping we can do that without demolishing the entire ramps. But I did want to understand the nature of the comment to get the pathways in alignment. I see Preston. I can't see them.
So yeah, so the issue, and first of all, I want to thank Public Works staff for asking for input and sending us the drawings in March in lieu of our having a meeting, and considering the volume of material that I know I sent back, as I am wont to often do. So thank you for dealing with that in your usual good humor. The issue that I raised with these ramps is not for the east-west direction of travel, but the direction of travel along the Albany Greenway path. So there's a Caltrans standard that ramps along multi-use paths be the same width as the path. So on this drawing, I think you can see this issue. It shows the east edge of the asphalt pavement of the path. Yeah, there. And so if you project that downward to the curb, so well, not down there, just if you extended that line that represents the east edge of the path to the curb, you would see that the ramp is not as wide as the path. So essentially, if you're on the edge of the path, you're gonna not be going down to the street on a ramp. You're gonna be dropping off the curb and or going up the curb. Maybe another way to explain this is if you're riding northbound on the path, which means you're on the right side of the path, on both corners, you have to deviate away from your line of travel towards the southbound line of travel in order to cross Washington. Because, yeah, I wish I could take control of the mouse. It'd be a lot easier to explain. But again, if you in your mind extend the line that is the edge of the eastern edge of the path to the curb, right there, yeah. I mean, you see where it intersects. There's no ramp right there.
Right.
You know, you've got a curb there, and that does not meet Caltrans standard for the way ramps are supposed to be configured along paths. And so it creates this choke point. So you have people who are going northbound having to move over into the position that people going southbound will be coming across in.
Preston,
Now there's a solution to this. Yes.
I've got a view on my screen. If I could share my screen briefly, I've got a street view photo that I think illustrates what you're talking about rather well. Can I show that?
Yes, there it is.
Can you make that so it's duplicative instead of extended? I can show you.
Does this show what you were talking about, Preston, in terms of line of travel?
Yeah, the ones that just.
And you're still muted.
I mean, we're getting into an area that.
Well, while Preston's figuring that out, he and I talked about this earlier, and the triangular area that you see here is still a lip. So in order to avoid that lip, if you're coming off of here, you have to sort of merge over. If anybody's coming against you, they then merge over here into the pedestrian area. It causes more mixing than is ideal. You want to take back over, Preston?
Yeah, I don't know. It's showing you rather than the view right now, at least on my screen. Than the street view. I don't know what
I'm sorry if
I
it's
don't know
not
what other
coming through.
people are seeing right now.
We're able to see the street view.
Okay. So the yeah, so the solution, or a possible solution, that the crossing at Portland doesn't have the same problem. There, the ramps are that the edge of the ramp does match the edge of the path as projected to the curb, and the solution that was deployed there is that the concrete plazas back of sidewalk are larger, and they're a full semicircle. Whereas for whatever reason at Washington on the north side, the concrete plaza semicircle has a knockout that brings the shoulder all the way to the sidewalk. And so because of that, you get that constraint that looks like it creates a non-compliance in terms of the width of that choke point, which looks like what is attempting to be corrected by changing the path configuration so that that choke point is at least 4 feet wide. So if you go to Portland and you use that solution instead, then you eliminate the choke point by creating more concrete sidewalk width there by making that concrete plaza a full semicircle. So essentially cutting off the end of the shoulder.
Right.
And so I mean, that's one possible solution you could look at. Again, the slopes may be different in Washington. I don't know if that will work, but a solution that complies with the standard is, really desired.
Yeah, that's true. I'd like to suggest that we do have smaller contractors like Villalobos and Associates, who's been doing a lot of our sidewalk repairs outside the curb ramps. I think this is probably something that they could probably make an effort to alleviate. The stuff that's behind the ramp looks like it's something they can handle fairly quickly.
And probably easier than as part of a paving contract.
Yeah, we don't necessarily need to put it into a large paving contract. We don't necessarily have to try to put it into these drawings when Villalobos can probably put this together without a lot of, like, a full-fledged design. I'll reach out to them and see if they can help us out on this. I do want to just reflect back, and I'll take the curb ramp issues back to our consultant, because I am still concerned about the slopes on the front of those ramps. If we're going to move those flares out on either of those ramps, I'm concerned that the slope issues that we already have are going to be exacerbated. I think south of that intersection, Ken, if you don't mind putting that that back on there, I think there's a drain inlet on the southeast side of that intersection. So that's another well, that might work. Yeah,
That's the north side.
Okay.
I think there's an inlet around the corner on the southeast side. It's on the Masonic side.
Okay, so that was the one that I was thinking of. So that
Yeah.
makes sense that it's not in the direction that you guys were proposing. Okay, we can do that.
Yeah, and what's on the drawings for the northern ramp is actually narrowing the ramp by, I don't know, a foot or two. The dimension isn't shown, but it has the halftone gray existing underneath, and then the black line overlay. And the black line actually shows narrowing the ramp or moving that eastern edge west by a foot or foot and a half, which would make the situation even worse than it is now, which I completely oppose doing that. And that isn't that, and I understand why that's happening. It's to open up that choke point there, which looks like it's only 2 feet wide right now, and so non-compliant to 4 feet. But the better solution is to have, this other concrete contractor come in and just finish out that semicircle or make it even wider back of sidewalk. And then that would allow you to actually move the east edge of the ramp to the east, so it lines up with the path, and still maintain the 4-foot level travel way.
Okay.
And provide for people who are rounding the corner and turning from the path up onto Washington or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. Well, I'll reach out to our contractor, our small concrete contractor, and get that adjusted. That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah, that seems like a much easier thing to control on a small contractor.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, it's like, that's gonna sit in our minds.
Okay. Can you guys see this?
We put that over there, but
Can you guys see the memo?
Yes.
Okay.
We did.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to our
You're back to the
previous
folder.
table.
Yeah, we're back on the folder.
Ah, okay.
guess they don't like that.
Sorry, Mark, you can't see it.
I can't see it. All right.
I moved
You
it
could
so
move over
that
here closer.
You know what I'll do?
there is a 6 feet restriction. I'm sorry, we can't.
I'm gonna go into the large conference room.
Okay.
You're right. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm giving you a hard time now.
No, you're absolutely right. I'll take that.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. All right. Where are we? Okay, with the ramp not consistent, we talked about that one. Line of travel, align columns of domes with direction of travel. So where applicable, wherever we have a, like say a modified C ramp, where we've got a lot of directional challenges for somebody coming off the curb, and we want to better direct them into a north-south direction or an east-west direction. Can we align the columns in the direction of travel? This recommendation isn't consistent, my understanding, with MUTCD or Caltrans standards. This was a feedback that I got back from our design consultant. They weren't comfortable actually recommending this as an improvement. I don't know if this is something that you guys have seen in other areas, but I don't think we're going to be able to do this. Sorry, Preston.
Yeah, I think maybe a couple different comments that the commission made, to my understanding, are getting intermixed and conflated. So as we were trying to deal with the wedge issue, and there were a number of different suggestions on how to deal with that. And one of the suggestions was just to eliminate the wedge and then just have two perpendicular pads with the columns of domes aligned in each direction, and leave a kind of a blank triangle in between. But aligning the domes is kind of can be thought of separately as to what we deal with the wedge, and the wedges have been eliminated, and thank you for doing that. So I think even if there's a full apron of domes, the domes in the travel direction still could be aligned with the travel direction. And then if it's a perpendicular intersection of streets, then that can continue all the way around that wrap, and that'll work fine because the domes will be aligned. If it's angled off 90-degree intersection, then the domes on each side could be laid out so that they're in the right travel direction, and then in between there'll have to be some intermediate splice between. So I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, it does. That makes sense, and that's something that we can. I can add a note to the drawings to reflect that. I appreciate the clarification, because I was under the impression that the areas where the wedge would be would not have any domes. That was the misunderstanding. So perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and that was one of the many suggestions that were made. But I think it's separable from the orientation of the domes themselves.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Let's see, line of travel, installed directional ramp at the San Pablo southeast corner. So you guys are probably snuck a peek at this already, but there is a, I think it might be it's either a sanitary or a storm drain manhole at that location. So that was why we basically didn't have any improvements in that location. We were proposing improvements on the northeast corner, but to get a directional ramp in that corner, I would have to figure out a way to move that manhole. And it's just, it's.
Isn't it in the Washington scope as well?
So
Yeah, it is.
yeah, this is a tricky one. So is there a standard around not having a lid, in the street side of where a ramp connects to the road?
So we've been in communication with Caltrans on this on a different project. They have a design criteria. It's not even a written criteria yet. It's essentially a draft where they want vaults removed from curb ramps. They don't have anything explicit about manholes. Manholes are pretty challenging to move. They were put there because they're a turning point or a low point. So there's some complications of moving it, 2 feet up, 2 feet west, or 2 feet east. So I don't know how easy this is going to be, and I don't know if there's any written either Caltrans or other standard that we should be following.
So, because my thought as the spouse of a power chair user is that in the kind of risk trade-off, if you will, between rolling over one of these lids and having to, with the diagonal ramp, essentially face partially away from oncoming motorists, the preference would be to roll over the lid so that it's easier to see oncoming motorists. Now that's a power chair. I think most power chairs could handle going over that lid. I mean, I understand there might be some, changes in grade as you go over the lid that are not ADA compliant. I think ADA only allows like a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch vertical step. But again, in that sort of risk benefit analysis, at least for power chairs, it seems like being able to go straight across has more benefit than the risk of going over that lid. For manual chairs, that might be a different calculation. I don't have familiarity with manual chair use and, sensitivities and whatnot. One idea that comes to mind is to do, kind of a modified case A where you've got more of an apron around a bit so people can choose their travel line. They can go diagonal if that's what they prefer. They can go straight if that's what they prefer. It's an unfortunate place to have a diagonal because in the whole project, this is probably the worst spot to have a diagonal of all because it's got the highest speed limit and the highest volume of motorists. So would love to have a different solution there. Did you lose me?
Okay. No, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
I had a network problem on my end. That's why I'm calling in by phone so that if I lose visuals, I don't lose audio as well. So I just lost visuals. That's why I was checking.
So there's a couple directions we can go here. One, I can take the modified case A back to our designer and we can talk this over and figure out what makes sense. I think I don't think there's a crosswalk crossing San Pablo at this location. I think we're just talking about a directional in the northwest direction crossing Washington. Is that correct?
No, I'm talking about the southeast corner of San Pablo and Washington.
Okay. Okay.
That's where the lid is, and that's where the diagonal ramp is now, and where it was, proposed to remain.
And there is a crosswalk
across San Pablo as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. The other reason I paused is because we are in communication with Caltrans about multiple improvements on Caltrans right of way as part of the San Pablo pedestrian improvements project. And this is one of those intersections that has been included in that project. So we would have to go back to Caltrans and present this modification to them.
Yeah, so is that the complete streets,
Yes.
the pedestrian part of the complete streets? And Albany doesn't have a grant for that, right? I mean, we applied, but we didn't get funded.
Albany has a partial grant for that.
Oh, that's news. Good news.
It is good news. Well, partially good news. We've got we think we're going to be able to hit some of these intersections. But we are having challenges with Caltrans because they are putting new and more restringent requirements on these ramps where they want all of the vaults to be removed from the ramps. Rather than made flush with any new ramp improvements, they just want them out. So the modified KSA, I would have to go back and look to see if actually it would fit.
And is that in that complete streets project? Is that is there a bulb out there? I can't recall at this point.
No, I think we kept the alignment of the sidewalk the same, and we were just looking at improved crossings with pedestrian crosswalks and a couple areas with beacons or improvements. This part of Washington, actually, we're proposing a signal change. So the way the western leg of Washington has a signal, we're going to actually propose having a linked signal on the eastbound intersection. Did that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Sure. Exciting that there's some funding to pursue that. But yeah, moving vaults, that's a project killer, given in terms of expense.
Yeah, so if I can find a way to make it fit, I will. I do want to kind of settle on kind of a game plan to decide what to do about this. If it doesn't fit, are you guys comfortable making no changes to this location until we get to the San Pablo improvements? Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. I see a couple thumbs up. Okay. Line of travel, replace undersized curving narrow sidewalks with straight standard with 5-foot sidewalks and eliminate tall vegetation. This is on key route. I put this on here because I actually think this is probably another thing that we can task a smaller contractor with doing rather than going back and making this design change. Yeah, this is another thing that I would take to Parks and Rec as well, because it does have even a minor, but it does have an impact on the vegetation. So they may have some issues with this.
Just a heads up, Robert. Mark, we can't really hear you when you're adding in. So if you want to speak to the commission.
I'll just be quiet.
I'm not opposed to straightening this sidewalk, but I'd rather have a small contractor do it than kind of add additional sidewalk onto our what is essentially a paving contract. So we'll keep this to a smaller contractor and take it. I'll put this on the agenda for Parks and Rec to consider as well.
Great. And yeah, it's not only straightened, it's widened because it's only 4 feet wide, and the sidewalks leading to it from either side on Washington are 5 feet wide. So it's just it's really bizarre choke point.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think going with a concrete contractor makes a lot of sense. So thank you.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Crossing distance.
I just want, if I can add, the truncated domes there are gray instead of yellow.
They are, yes. So we can get that changed. We can get that corrected. Thank you. Crossing distance at the Albany Greenway key route. These are the bulb outs across Washington. I spoke with the fire department. Let me pull this up here. Okay. So this is a diagram we had. I think we shared this with you in March. This is a diagram we had NCE do for us. This is the current alignment at Masonic. So a engine 71, which is the fire department's largest engine. This is kind of the sweep that they make currently to make that right-hand turn from Masonic onto Washington. And then the next diagram shows a similar turn, Washington moving west, making a right turn onto Masonic North. So you can see here that we've already got some restrictions in terms of how wide that sweep can be. So the fire department's preference is if there are going to make anything to narrow this intersection for pedestrians, their preference is to have striping only. They don't want a concrete bulb out in this location because it would make this turn and the other turns that much more difficult. You guys have feedback in terms of putting down some striping? Yeah, Preston?
So thank you for providing these, and I think this is good analysis. I think it indicates that that is what's in the ATP is conceptual as things are at that level, and so not workable really right at the corners. But what's in the ATP is not just focused at the corners. I don't know. Well, I don't know if you can go back to the turning templates there that you just showed. It's about sort of taking up the width, some of the width of the street across the width of the Greenway. So in that image you have right there on the south side, and I don't know why the front of the fire truck is so far from the center line there after it makes the turn. But if the front of the fire truck was along the more closer to the center line, as would be typical for driving, there's a lot of space against the curb that is not occupied. And this has a nexus with, which I know we'll get to, with where the bioretention basin goes. But I'll just note that there's a lot of space there. More pertinent for this discussion, perhaps at this moment, before we get to the bioretention basin, is the north side. So maybe you can go to the turning template for the north side. So here you see there's just a lot of space that's not utilized. There is one parking space there. And what happens is when that parking space is occupied, and particularly by a larger vehicle, it cuts the sight lines between people using the Greenway and westbound motorists on Washington, which is problematic. And I think is part of why the ATP called for expanding or pushing the Greenway out into those parking spaces across its entire width to eliminate that sightline barricade. So what I would be interested in seeing is that, you know, either there be a concrete island there, preferably actually a landscape area with the drainage going between the landscape area and the existing curb lines. So it wouldn't, you know, require changing drainage, and it wouldn't necessarily be a bioretention area, but it would just help to green the street, narrow the street, and open up the sight lines. And I think greening the street is not, you know, nothing. I mean, we've got green infrastructure expansion in our climate action and adaptation plan. We've already experienced 5 degrees Fahrenheit of warming in the last 30 years in Albany. And, you know, I suppose you could say it's getting more comfortable by and large, but we're at the point now where we're getting more and more days over 90 degrees. And so reducing pavement area and increasing landscaping where there's opportunities to do that and accomplish other goals at the same time is part of our adaptation strategy.
Okay, well, yeah, I can see that. So I was focused on this crossing on the corner.
Yeah.
If we're looking at something different than that, like starting this this green green curb or island, maybe
Mhm.
backside of that curb ramp over
Mhm.
here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I certainly don't want to imply that you misunderstood. I mean, what the ATV shows is basically bulbing out the whole width, including the corner. And what's been shown is that doing it at the corner doesn't work.
Okay.
You know, so it's useful work, useful knowledge. And thanks for taking a look at that. But that doesn't necessarily mean we need to throw out the whole thing or that none of it has any benefit.
So I'm going to put this back on the designer, but I am going to direct them to look at this as a potential addendum item.
Mhm.
I prefer that we don't hold up the paving itself for this analysis. So I'm not going to have them change the drawing set to include this, but I will direct them to look into this, and I'm sure we can find plenty of examples of areas where something like this would work, and they've probably done similar projects.
Mhm.
Okay.
Could that area also be used for bioretention?
It could be. This area doesn't drain a whole bunch because Spokane is over here, and Spokane, I believe, already drains northward towards Brighton. So this area really only collects anything that spills over here and direct runoff. We put the bioretention on the south side because that collects a lot more runoff coming from the key route direction. If we put a bioretention basin in there, it'll be small because we just won't have a lot of capture area.
How much capture area have you designed in on the southern portion?
I'd have to go back and look at the calcs, but let's jump over to that since we're talking about it.
I'm just looking for a ballpark, not a, you know, what's
Well,
the basin is 320 square feet according to the drawings. I don't know if that was your question or your question was how much surface area is draining to that basin.
that and where is it located exactly? I haven't had
Yeah. So we'll talk about the location. The area that it drains. So this is the Loney Greenway. This is Washington at the Albany Greenway. This is kind of the BART tracks right of way is this line here. This is I believe this is the fence line that is the eastern boundary of the Greenway. So if you're on the bike path now, there's kind of a natural unpaved path that goes in this direction over here. I think this is, I can't remember that.
Spokane.
Pardon?
Yeah, Spokane right there.
Okay, so that is Spokane, and the key route is in this direction. So the drainage area is at least this area over here from key route on going in this direction. And it all flows in this direction. So the inlet will be here. This is the area of the bioretention, and then there'll be an outlet on this side over here underneath the sidewalk. So we're basically proposing it just outside of the what BART considers their impact zone, their area of influence. So that BART has this structure here. This is the underground area of the structure, and they're considering anything outside of this kind of a zone of influence. So rather than have to be constrained with BART's approval process, I had them move the retention basin, which was originally here, and we pushed it out to be over here. Same area. We're just going to make it work in this area over here. We also have, this also kind of cuts off some casual traffic that goes in this direction, which will end up going in around this way.
Will there be something physical that prevents people from walking or running through the bioretention area?
We were actually proposing maybe some other plantings over here, some native plants, and then we can come up with some landscape improvements that kind of either rocks or something maybe more vertical that would stop people from taking that shortcut.
Is there anything that would stop people from going between that tree and the BART vertical support?
No.
So that might be an alternative that people would choose.
Yeah, I think so. That if we make this unattractive enough, this will be the next preferred path.
Okay.
Okay. Sure. Thank you. Let's see. I think we're nearing the end
So,
here.
well, actually, sorry, I had a comment on that. So again, not to go to the turning template, but there's a lot of space in the street there. Looks like there's about 320 square feet of space east of Bart's right-of-way, between the driveway there and Bart's right-of-way. I measured it out today, and it's, I don't know, looks like it's about 50 feet long or 45 feet long. So given that that doesn't interfere with turning movements, it's in line with the Greenway, and it seems like it'd be better not to have these underdrains under the sidewalk in terms of maintenance and, you know, also just expensive construction. I would put forward that it seems like there's a lot of advantages to putting this bioretention in the street there as what would also be essentially a bioswale flow through. You know, there's an example of that on 6th Street at Cornices Creek that Albany built as part of its project there. So I don't know, it just doesn't seem, and again, we'd get more green space out of it. It would provide more of a sense of separation between people using the sidewalk and traffic on the street, which has been shown by research to, you know, lead to people choosing to use sidewalks more and walk more. It would be in line with the active transportation plan, again, which called for greening into the street up to the edge of the traffic lane, you know, taking out the parking there. So my preference is to put it in the street.
Okay, we can look at that. Yeah, we'll do that.
While we're gonna look at the landscape, we might as well.
Yeah, we're already putting a little bit more onto the designer to look at the north side. So we'll go.
Oh
ahead
yeah, and if there's something, yeah, great. And there was something else I noticed, which is that the existing tree that's just east of the fence line, the extent of its canopy is underrepresented in this drawing. And so, yeah, so its canopy would actually, in reality, extends about halfway across the bioretention basin as shown. And, you know, my thin knowledge of the rule of thumb is that the root structure extends out to the canopy. And so if you're starting to excavate a lot inside the canopy, you're at risk of really causing morbidity of the tree. So to me, that's another reason not to put it there, because this drawing's not accurate as to the extent of the tree canopy.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, we'll go back and look at that. That sounds fine.
Okay, thanks.
Crossing distance at Pomona Southwest. This is I think a recommended was a case A wraparound. So I don't think the case A wraparound is going to be a problem. I think I was more thinking about anything that looked, I think you guys were maybe proposing another bulb out. So the same comment about a bulb out at Masonic and the Greenway was going to hold for Pomona for the turning radius, and we would propose striping and bot dots for that corner. Should I pull that up?
Yeah, I can, while you work on that. I think, again, there might have been a bit of miscommunication here. So at least for my part, I wasn't suggesting a bulb out there or at the large radius corners, which are similar at Key Route in Washington. And what I was suggesting instead was that those corners should be made like almost every other corner in Albany. So the radius of those corners now is about 30 feet by my measure. The radius of most corners in Albany is 10 feet. And, you know, I don't see any reason why these need to be 30-foot radius. That just promotes high speed and lengthens the crossing distances. And this is a 30-foot, effectively a 30-foot street intersecting a 30-foot street. And there are numerous examples of that in Albany that have 10-foot radii corners. So I presume the turning works. So Adams and Clay, Adams and Castro, Dartmouth at Keynes, Stanage, Cornell, Talbot, Evelyn, they're all 10-foot radii at a 30 by 30 intersection. So it seems like this is the opportunity just to, you know, clean that up and bring those corners out. Again, it would provide opportunity for landscaping behind, for expanding the green area, and provide for directionality of the ramps so that it's more obvious which direction people are using sidewalks are headed for better communication with motorists. So you've essentially drawn it in stripe on that. It's just actually make it in concrete, you know, bring the, well, maybe not quite right where the stripe is, but that idea, bring the curb out.
Right.
And regularize it with the other corners in the city.
Right.
The other corners in the same intersection.
Yeah.
Over here. Yeah, I can take this back. I didn't get specific feedback on this location from fire, but you make a good point that it's already an existing condition in multiple locations within the city. We can do that. We could also put it on Villalobos to do that. This is a little bit different because it's into the intersection. So rather than have this repaved, it may be something that we integrate into the drawings. I will go back and communicate this back to the fire department because they didn't give me specific comments on this issue. And
Rob,
then your comment stands with this one as well.
yes.
Oh, sorry, Ken.
No, it's okay. And yes, the comment stands for that other corner as well. Obviously, at Washington Pomona that you're showing now, the northwest corner is part of a kind of an odd intersection. No argument with the curvature there, but at the bottom in the southwest, there's just, I don't think there's any good reason for a wide turn there. And I want to point out with the two corners at the eastern end of the Key Route Washington intersection, those are really high demand sidewalk areas at pickup and drop off or beginning and end of school. So,
Yeah.
you know, maybe those are areas where we do add more cement instead of landscaping because there's just so many kids coming through there.
In this area?
No, on the eastern side.
Okay, gotcha. Over here. Okay, thank you.
You know, the whole intersection is high demand, but
yeah,
for me, the priority is providing the space for the number of people who come through there.
Okay.
It's a very urban intersection a couple times every weekday.
Right. Let me go back to Pomona just, and this is without me doing any calculations, I'm just speculating here. Pomona is one of our flattest streets, and it has exceptional drainage problems. It's one of these areas where we get a lot of feedback from homeowners that they just can't find ways to actually drain their properties by discharging onto the street. So this corner here is one where flows from the west side of Pomona follow this, hug this curb, follow down this curb and gutter, and it actually flows from here and it goes back up south on Key Route. So it's quite circuitous, and putting more footage in this corner might just exacerbate those problems. So I'm going to have to look at these elevations.
So then maybe the stripe and dots as the backup alternative there.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. I'll look at the elevations. I'll see just how. I'm afraid I'm already going to make a bad situation worse for our residents on that street. But you guys know more about the foot traffic in this intersection than I do. The school is right up here.
Tends to be north-south during, school start and end, but there's quite a bit of foot traffic up and down Washington.
Yeah.
But, if there's a compelling drainage reason to leave it the way it is, that's a reasonable argument.
Okay. All right. We got just a couple more comments here. Pomona Southwest. The stop sign. Staff can perform a traffic analysis and bring back for a discussion outside of this contract. So putting in a stop sign and striping is not heavy lifting for a contractor to do. We can do this after we feel comfortable that it's the right direction. So if commission wants to recommend it, then we can do it. I just don't need to do it as part of this contract. But we could actually do traffic counts and see just how beneficial this would be.
I was interested in raising this issue because we're dealing with the intersection now, and I'm assuming that you're restriping at the end of this project.
Yes.
There are items in the transportation, the active transportation plan that haven't been striped in 7 years. We cleared out most of those, but it can take a long time. I guess my response is, would that mean that the commission would have to request to include this in our work plan from the city council?
I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that.
was just going to add, I think there was a mix of opinions on the commission. We didn't have clear direction on this, and it was staff's interest if we were going to revisit adding. There was also reference to the other intersections along Key Route and looking at them as a whole versus doing this one because we're repaving this one was what I was recommending, so that we can make a decision that works more consistently versus just picking this one off if we do decide that it's a better configuration. The other thing that I think, and to your comment of when it might happen, if it doesn't happen now, we do have resurfacing of Key Route in the queue in the 2-year identification of repaving projects. So that was an opportunity to do, if we did recommend a change, to do it at multiple intersections so it's consistent versus just this one.
Then I'm happy to defer to the Key Route paving plan.
Okay. And the last comment I had here was on the stormwater treatment. So I think we talked about that already, and we'll bring that back to our design consultant about putting that into the street right of way. I am going to stop sharing and give it back to the chair.
Okay. Any commissioner comments or questions? Preston? I think you're muted.
I'm mute.
I told myself to shut up. I said, tell me to shut up at some point, but I shut myself up. So yeah, a couple just more outstanding kind of detailed items that are general across the project. It looks like all the back of what I call back of ramp retaining curbs that can be curved are now curved or radiused in the drawings. So thank you very much for that. There are some that cannot be because of, you know, infrastructure or limitations and right of way. However, it looks like almost none of the retaining curbs that are what I call it front of ramp or between sidewalk and street are radiused, which is also part of Albany standards. So essentially the rule is there should be no cornered retaining curbs anywhere. They should be radiused.
Yep.
The radius is also, yeah.
No, you're correct. We saw that as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. And there's the radius that I could see, and I might have missed it, is not specified on the plans, which, you know, typically would not be the case for the edge of a road. So I believe that the standard is 2-foot radius, what's in Albany standards. So I think that should appear somewhere on the plans if it doesn't appear. And again, I might have missed it. The back of retaining curb, the backside retaining curb at the southwest ramp at Masonic is within the sidewalk width. And all the other ones have been moved out of the sidewalk width. So thank you for that. This one is still in the sidewalk width in the drawing. Now that may be because, and I didn't think to look in street view, that may be because there's something there that prevents it from being out of the sidewalk width. So can either take a look at that now or just take a note and revisit that.
I think it's because that's the way it's built now.
Oh.
It's an existing condition.
But I think that one is proposed for reconstruction in the drawing. I mean, so they might be following what's there now, and it just sort of slipped through in the drawings. And then finally, from me, at long last, the friction coefficient for the mats, an ASTM standard or Caltrans standard is
We're
specified. Losing me, really? That's strange. Can you hear me?
I think we just lost Ken.
Yeah, that might have been on Ken's side.
Yeah.
Okay, because I called in by phone. I'm like, I hope the phone system's not going down. The strange days. Anything is possible. Does the friction coefficient that is specified, do the mats that have recently been installed meet that specification?
The mats that have been installed, I think over the past 2 years, have met that specification. So we did Evelyn, we did a couple at Keynes and Solano. I don't recall doing any others recently, but I'd have to go back. I think we're looking at like a 2015 standard from Caltrans that we're referencing now. There's a revised 2018 that's referenced in this project.
Okay, because my anecdotal experience, observation, all the mats have been installed over the last 10 years seem the same in terms of friction coefficient. So if those ones that went in 2015, or if the ones that went in recently met a 2015 standard, and if the 2018 standard isn't a substantial increase in coefficient, then that specification is not what we're looking for. We want something, you know, a much higher friction coefficient. Okay. And we specifically forwarded at some point a link to a product that I think they both make mats with a higher friction coefficient. They also make an epoxy coat with a grit that goes on existing mats or after mats are installed. But the point is, anything like what's out there now, even the most recently installed one has too low a friction coefficient.
Okay, so I did get that link and I did look at that product. So I'll look at it again and compare it to what we installed at Keynes and Solano. I think those are the most recent ones. I want to see how they align with each other, because I do remember the product information you sent over had I think it had a Caltrans standard, and it didn't specify what friction coefficient it actually produced. It just referenced the standard, that it complied with. So I'll see if how it compares to the ones we installed.
Yeah, and so even if, that would be a problem if they don't actually provide a quantitative value. But I know from, I think it was Councilmember Pillich who observed that product in San Diego downtown, which I've also had experience with. And so just from our own experience anecdotally, it was a much higher friction coefficient. I mean, it was like, walking on a sidewalk. It was a grit, essentially.
Okay.
Thank you for forbearing.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Okay. Any other commissioner questions? Not seeing any. Ken, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ken.
I'm sorry, I dropped off. Preston, did you get a chance to talk about Sidewalk Color?
No, please do. Okay.
So this is a kind of a minor part of the standards, but our standard requires adding in what I think is called lamp black to color the cement so that it matches the other cement in Albany. And this is something that, in the excitement has gotten left behind a little bit. And you'll notice that newer sidewalk patches really show because they stand out because they're bright and much more white. And I'd love to see us following the standard, which is part of our design guidelines for sidewalks. And I'd love to see that for this project and for the sidewalk repairs in general. Robert, was there a reason that got left behind?
So I don't believe that it was left behind. There's a couple things that may be happening here. The sidewalk contract references our standard specifications, and that is listed very clearly as 1.5 pounds of lamp black. Whenever we do kind of spot repairs, such as that on, I think, Santa Fe and Solano, we specify 1.5 pounds of lamp black. If it's not included in the drawings, we reference City of Albany standard specifications and drawings via reference, so that it's always included. Anything that is in our standard specs or our standard drawings is included by reference, so we could always go back to it and point to it, and contractors have to comply with it. So I don't think this project or recent design projects have missed that. I think we've actually had to redo some spots where the contractor admitted that they forgot them. Another possibility is that we're putting it up against weathered concrete, and it's just very difficult to match if that original concrete has been weathered to a point where it's either a darker or a lighter shade.
Well, I'd love to see a patch that you're sure has the lamp black in it.
Okay, that sounds fine. I can give Justin a list, and we can go from there.
Great.
Okay. Any other commissioner comments? Okay. So turning to public comment, would any members of the public like to talk about this? Okay, Amy, would you like to go ahead? Amy Smollins.
Okay, yeah, I've got two questions. One is when Preston was discussing the sightline problems with the Greenway and Washington, and proposed a kind of a complex long-term solution. In the short term, could you just red curb that whole section, which would help sightlines tremendously right now? That would be nice. That's my first question. My second question is that the observation that Washington's been a designated bike boulevard for years, and it's literally been the worst street in Albany for years. What's the ETA for the paving, getting it paved? Please? That's my two questions.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All righty, any other public comments? Okay, we'll turn it back to the commission. Do we have an ETA with the improvements?
Yeah, thank you. So the improvements, essentially, this is the contract to make those improvements. So at the end of this meeting, we will go back to our designers and incorporate the feedback from this meeting. We will ask council to approve, authorize advertising this project. That usually takes about 4 to 5 weeks of advertising. And then we're targeting the first meeting in July to award a contract for the paving improvements. We estimate that the paving itself is going to take somewhere between 40 and 60 days, depending on some of these improvements, some of these comments back to us. But we have 45 working days in the contract, so that puts essentially construction in late summer. So August, September, we will be basically removing 6 inches of asphalt across Washington from San Pablo all the way to Pomona, and putting down 6 to 8 inches of new asphalt, and these all of these curb ramp improvements that we've talked about, and the bioretention areas that we talked about, and the striping improvements that we talked about. So all of this together as a comprehensive project is going to council next, and to advertising, and then once we get a contractor on board, we'll be ripping that street apart.
Okay. Ken?
I just want to add that, Amy, the nasty raised manhole cover between Key Route and Pomona has already been fixed and lowered. So that's exciting. And I want to say thank you to staff for allowing us, even though we didn't have a meeting, to respond to both the Washington repaving and the Adams Street repaving projects. I know that Preston and I sent them quite a few comments and a detailed response, and I appreciate their taking that into consideration. So thank you.
Happy to do that. Thank you.
Commissioners, anyone? And there was a public comment about the red curb. I'm assuming that would be done independent of this project. And I don't know if that should be discussed now or later.
Red curbing typically does have a public noticing process that would go before this commission, so we can discuss it under possible future agenda items.
Okay, great. Preston, did you? Nope. Okay. So. Okay. Do we have any motions?
I move we approve the recommendation for council to approve the project with the modifications suggested.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, normally we do a group voice vote, but given the limitations of Zoom and that Zoom can only hear one person at a time, it's been requested that we have a roll call vote. So Justin, would you mind having us do a roll call vote, just so it's clear to the public how we are voting?
Sure.
Before we vote,
Ken, go ahead.
I thought Robert said that this has already gone to council, and that we're sort of already in the contracting stage or along in the design stage. So
let me clarify that. So after this meeting, we'll incorporate the design comments that we received here And then we will proceed to council to request permission to advertise.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I think we have a second. So if you could read the roll, have a roll call vote for us, Justin.
Commissioner Javindal,
Aye.
Commissioner Jordan,
Yes.
Commissioner McCroskey,
Yes.
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Aye.
Chair Paulson.
Yes. Okay. So we will move on then to the next item on the agenda. That is item 5-2, strategies for improving physical distancing on publicly owned right-of-ways. And I believe staff would like to present information.
Thank you, Chair. As you're aware, since shelter-in-place orders were issued in the county, maintaining 6 feet of physical distance from other people outside of the household has been required. In order to help residents meet the physical distancing requirement, some jurisdictions have begun implementing various strategies to increase the space available to pedestrians and/or improve compliance with maintaining adequate distance between people. As I've reviewed some of the actions taken in other jurisdictions, I classify the main actions as focused on limiting access to areas where crowding is occurring, closing or limiting access to streets to provide additional pedestrian space, and restricting parking and repurposing parking lanes for non-motorized uses. Albany staff has focused on restricting use of facilities as directed by the county health orders and communicating safe practices on the facilities that remain open, which by itself has taken up a significant capacity in terms of city equipment and staff resources to date. The open facilities with the most use at this point, at least anecdotally, are the Albany bulb and the Albany Greenway. But staff hasn't found to date the level of use of these facilities to be such that people aren't generally able to maintain physical distancing. While staff will continue to monitor activity, particularly as the health orders evolve in the coming months, we're not proposing any changes at this time, but we invite your feedback and discussion on the topic. It also was just going to note their comments that were received up until noon were posted on the website. A few other comments have come in since then, which went directly to the commissioners, and we'll load the rest of the comments that have been received to link to them to the agenda after the meeting as well. And with that, I'll open it for questions and comment.
Commissioner, questions? It's like nobody. Robert.
Thanks for the presentation. Do we know what our adjacent cities are doing in Berkeley and El Cerrito?
Berkeley's not doing anything right now.
And I haven't heard anything from El Cerrito on this.
Ken?
Feels like I've already used up my comments, but I'm going to launch in anyway. So I've been doing some research, and there's a NACTO online Google Doc of things that other cities have been doing. There are many cities around the world who have done some form of adaptation. From my standpoint, Albany's already a grid. We've got reduced traffic. I'm not sure if closing streets is an immediate need, but I'm open to that if people have strong feelings about that. I was thinking about how we could give people tools and resources to use some of the things that we already have in a way that allows more social distancing and more comfort and could accommodate more people. As we're seeing out in places like the Bulb and on the Greenway, they're pretty busy. So my first idea was that we could recommend that people in general stay on the right-hand sidewalk of a street that they're going on. And that kind of sets up a directionality and would remove a lot of conflict. Now, obviously, if your destination is in the middle of a block, you wouldn't necessarily follow that. But if you were walking up Solano, choosing to go on the right-hand side, anybody else who's out walking for exercise on Solano, who followed that, you would then have sort of a circulation pattern, and that could also work on other streets. So that kind of stay right, as I think somebody came up with idea, is one. And then if I can share my screen here, I came up with some ideas for some of our public space to support what we have. One of my ideas was to take, sorry, let's see if I can, there we go, to take the bulb area. And this is an older map from the ATP, and these pathways on the bulb aren't exact, but it's a good generalization, especially on the neck. I've heard anecdotally from All Dog and others that there are quite a few people out at the bulb. When I visited myself, the parking area was pretty crazy, but people definitely want to go there. The Point Isabel dog park is closed, as is, I believe, our dog park. So what if we made some of the trails directional, or recommended that people walked or biked directionally on the trails? For example, out on the upper trail and back in on the lower trail, or the reverse, either way. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
So you could flip this so it was out on the bottom, back on the top. This trail is fairly wide. I think it provides a access back and forth. One directionality on this trail might be helpful. It's a little hard to do anything here. Fortunately, this trail, and especially where it turns to sidewalk, is wider. I'm not sure anything needs to be done there. But that would provide some public space that has a little bit of organization to it. Back in more central Albany, our Greenway is a high demanded thoroughfare for people exercising and getting places. We have this history of the eastern parking strip on Masonic being closed and used as an alternate when the BART construction was going on. What if we coned off the eastern Masonic parking strip and maybe just a little bit more into the lane? And we said, okay, if you're traveling north on the Greenway and you're a walker or a jogger or a slowed speed bicyclist or a kid on a bike, we'd like you to use the Greenway. And if you're coming south, we'd like you to use the parking lane. And there are some advantages that this area just naturally has, because the Greenway path comes down to Masonic at every intersection. So moving between those modes and those areas is pretty straightforward and direct. And then as you get further down on Masonic, at the Berkeley border, if you had this coning off, pardon my cones, if you had this coning off at Cotternese's Creek, the road gets much narrower as you go into Berkeley, but there's a nice sloped ADA ramp here, well, at some point, without the truncated domes, a ramp to get up onto a path that then connects off screen to the Greenway. So there's a nice transition there. And at the northern end at Brighton, it's a good connection because the path is back at Masonic. So that seems like something that would be fairly simple to do. Oh, and as part of this, I'd be interested in designating Masonic as a 15 mile per hour street, posting that and making bikes a priority. The idea would be that if you're a faster cyclist, you would hopefully use Masonic and get the priority to use that there. I know it's a bike boulevard now, but that doesn't always get followed with people wishing to travel quickly through. This idea is practical because, to me, because there aren't homes on the east side of Masonic. That parking lane was closed for several years and is closed regularly as part of street sweeping. So this is not an unusual concept to the people who live along there. And then my last idea is, at least that I've already thought of, is the super block of the high school and Memorial Park. This is a high demand area for recreation. Currently, I believe the dog park is closed and the playground is closed. People are still out there. I was there midday on a weekday for a couple of hours, and there are still people using this area for recreation. What if we closed off the parking lane around the whole block and either made this a directional recreation exercise area, or even left it as it is, and just said, look, we're going to have no parking on the edges of the block. There are no homes again on that side of the street. There's very low demand for parking at the high school and the pool and Memorial Park these days. And this would be a way that people could, another place that people could go to in Albany and practice more social distancing. The sidewalks, especially around the high school side, are quite narrow. This would give a lot more breathing room. People could use this as a circuit, much as they do in the Albany Tri with their bikes and jogging and walking. And it's a way to repurpose part of our built environment that is not in high demand right now. So those are my 4 ideas. Thanks for the time.
Great, thank you. Robert?
Just a question on Ken's ideas. And yeah, those are great. Do you envision them to be 24-hour, or would there be staff putting out cones and picking them up daily? How did you envision that part to work?
Thanks. That reminds me, and good questions. So in all of this, I wouldn't expect all of this to appear overnight. One of the things that we've seen in San Francisco and Oakland is that they phase in their street closures and adaptations. So hopefully we could come up with some sort of prioritization and all. I was also told by a staff person that they used a lot of barriers in closing off the playgrounds and parks. I've also heard that the city has a lot of cones, and I know the city has a lot of those wooden barriers. So I think we still have some materials to deal with to implement this kind of thing. And specifically to answer your question, I see this as a 24-hour implementation. I don't think that we would normally have staff time every day to implement these and then take them away. And then what if somebody's parked there? And you can post, but having the cones out would really, or whatever materials, really drives home the change in use. The other thing I want to touch on that I learned about in talking with Bike East Bay and doing some research is that these sorts of implementations seem to do better when the local people are helping. For example, in Oakland, in blocks where they've closed off, where the neighbors actually help put the barricades back if they get knocked, they have a much higher success rate at behavior conforming with the street slowdown. And if we do get to the point, and for these plans, if we do get to the point for this or for street closures, I would consider looking at the Albany list of National Night Out street closures for blocks that are a little more activist, a little more committed, and might be willing to help maintain, the straightness of the cones or whatever. Thanks.
A quick question for staff. I like all the ideas that you had. If we were to put cones down, do we need to do we need to notice the neighbor? Like, do we need to let them know beforehand, or? I'm just trying to get a sense of what would be required for that.
Our general practice with most of these would just be parking removal, is to notify anywhere within the radius of the parking space for removed. That's how we generally go about that. Our normal.
Okay. Other commissioner comments, questions?
I I've spoken enough. I'll let Commissioner Javandel go.
Okay. Freed?
Okay. So I think that one of the things, just to comment on something Ken mentioned in terms of walk on the right-hand side of the street, I would suggest considering walking on the left to the extent that anyone might feel inclined to step into the street to pass somebody. They would then be facing oncoming traffic. Not that I'm advocating for people to walk in the street, but recognizing some people may do that. The other thing is just looking at the county order. Anyone who got their AC alert messages, it says to wear masks unless or if you can't stay 6 feet apart from people. So it's pretty clear that if people are wearing masks, we don't need to provide a whole lot of extra space. And I think we need to not get too carried away in terms of what the level of risk is. And the only reason I bring that up is just to try to understand how much need we have to do something. I know that the traffic volumes are way down. A lot of people are probably comfortable walking in some streets if they need to, or stepping into the street to pass someone or let somebody pass if that comes down to it. Looking at our typical traffic patterns, when we have had cut through traffic, my perception has been it's folks who are getting off the freeway because the freeway is just way too jammed and they're trying to get to UC Berkeley or somewhere to the south on the morning commute. And so then they're cutting through El Cerrito and Albany and Berkeley city streets. The freeway is a whole lot faster right now as a route to bypass Albany entirely. So in the absence of any data, my speculation is that most of the traffic we're seeing on Albany city streets are the local residents. And any effort to close streets would just be saying, no through traffic. Great, everyone who's already here is a resident and therefore not through traffic. I don't think we'd see a big change by trying to close streets. So I think we're, Ken has looked not at closing streets, but at finding, parking lanes that can be used for walking space. That seems like a much more rational approach to take. But it probably comes down to what resources do we have to cone off or barricade off those areas. If we look at Masonic, it's, from the Berkeley border to Brighton is almost exactly 1 mile. If you put a cone every 10 feet, not counting intersections, it's probably 500 cones. I don't know if Public Works has that many cones on hand. So that, it may be something worth considering, but I think we have to look at what resources are available before we commit to doing anything. The block around the high school and Memorial Park is 0.6 miles around or something on that order. Maybe that's only 300 cones. As far as the leaving stuff out overnight, I get nervous about leaving things out overnight if they're not lit. Maybe if they're cones, it's not as threatening as if they were barricades that people might crash into in the dark. Hopefully people are paying attention, not crashing into things, but definitely would have to understand, what's the magnitude of the problem and what's the level of effort that would be required to implement any particular improvement. And I think not losing sight of the fact that the simplest solution in terms of preventing disease transmission is just to wear masks. And it's not that people are going to be walking elbow to elbow, but there's space. If you're patient, you're not in a hurry, you can step into a driveway or between parked cars for someone else to pass on a narrow sidewalk, looking ahead so you're not caught off guard at the last second that there's someone right in front of you. I think there are workable alternatives if that's what we want to bear in mind as we move forward. Those are my comments.
Preston?
Yeah, I want to thank Commissioner McCroskey for creative thinking and pragmatic thinking. I agree that I don't think, given Albany's traffic volumes, just anecdotally, and speeds, which I've heard is an issue that's driven closure of streets to through traffic in other cities, is that there's been at least a perceived, if not measured, increase in motorist speeds. We don't have data. I would suggest that if we are going to consider closing any streets to through traffic at any point, which again I don't support at this point, but that there should be some surveys, or a survey at least, done to look at what the speed distribution is, to get to what Commissioner Jovendell is suggesting, which is, make this more of a data-driven effort. But none of that applies to the ideas that Commissioner Karofsky's brought up, which I think are great and apt. Certainly the Greenway is getting a lot of use now, so I think creating more space there as maybe a first step, although maybe the first step is the bulb, because while the paved part of the Bay Trail out there is maybe only 10 feet wide, there's a lot higher volume of people beyond the end of that because of the parking. So I think setting up, it wouldn't take many barricades to set up a sign suggesting, hey, go out on the bottom trail and back on the top trail. And if only 10% of the people shift their behavior, well, then that's 10%. And in terms of the masks, my understanding of the masking is a little different. That the order is, wear a mask where you can't really control your physical distancing. Supermarkets, things like that. But you really shouldn't treat it as a replacement for physical distancing. So to the extent that there are any areas that are, starting to get congested, I think opening up more space or trying some of these ideas, use the sidewalk on the left to help people maintain that distance is advisable. Now, in terms of noticing for barricading parking, usually that's a pretty long process. So there'd be noticing, come back in a meeting in a month, we make a decision. I'm not sure that really meets the needs at the time. I don't know what to do about that. But maybe a place to start is to figure out this phasing idea. Maybe the signs in the bulb is the first phase, since it's the easiest to do, and there's a lot of people out there. And then pick one of the other ones as the next step. Thanks.
Okay. Any other commissioner comments, questions? Robert?
Do we have the ability as a city to do changes in an emergency situation? I don't think Oakland did noticing. I think they made a webpage, and that webpage was out there about a week in advance of changes, but I don't think there was official noticing. And I'm not talking about street closures, but anything we do if we're going to remove parking, do we have some authority to do that in these situations? And I have one more question after that.
I can jump in and take a shot at answering this. I think in terms of the commission's authority, all in addition to your deliberations, really needs to go to the city council. And this is it adds more time to it. Now, of course, we're in a situation that is constantly evolving, and there's probably in one form or another going to be some sort of change in our way of living for 18 months or more. So we can kind of think about this in perhaps a longer term. As to the City of Oakland's practice, I gather from what I've heard, there wasn't great communication within the organization itself, let alone with the members of the community. So I wouldn't necessarily use the City of Oakland's practice as a guide to what we should do in Albany. I think community has an expectation that we reach out to them when something's going to happen in front of their home. And unless it's life safety or there's a higher governmental authority, such as the public health director, that if that was something that was very firm and clear that we needed to act on, then we would do it. But to do it, make a decision at the city level for something like this, probably should be some form of public noticing. And we could think about what that would be exactly, but I wouldn't want the commission to just kind of unilaterally do this without full input.
Thanks. My second question is more on another type of treatment. I think it's El Cerrito that has turned off PED actuation and has gone to PED recall at all times. And I don't know if that's something that we've considered here, given our low volumes of traffic.
I think, do you want to take that one, Justin?
Sure. We have discussed that internally. We've currently just put notice on the ones that are on automatic recall, just putting tape over the buttons, and we're planning to improve the signage to let people know that they don't need to press the buttons when it's on automatic recall. For the other signals, we do have the capacity to put them on automatic recall. My hesitation with just going out and doing that is we do have some of the signals that have a longer time set on a minor street for seniors to cross or extended time. And I'm just worried about the counterbalance of that, of reducing potential compliance at an intersection when we have smaller vehicle volume, and you end up having a lot more waiting at an empty intersection potentially with it. So we had some discussion of, are there some intersections that would be more appropriate, but if we do it at some intersections, not others. So we haven't made any changes at the staff level for the other signals that aren't currently on automatic recall.
The issue with the seniors crossing is that when they press the button, then they know they're going to get their full cycle to cross the street, as opposed to if they're coming up and they're in the middle of the cycle. Is that the concern?
The concern is if it's on a street that doesn't, so for example, Marin and Peralta, we have the slower crossing rate there. So if we had it on the automatic recall, you would have the longer stop on Marin every cycle. And the concern would be, with Peralta being the more minor street, are you going to increase non-compliance with the traffic signal when it's potentially more often that you have a driver on Marin waiting at an empty signal? So that's my hesitation with just going ahead and making those kind of changes across the board.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other commissioner comments before I open it up to public comment? Okay. So Leticia Berlin, if you would like to go ahead and provide comment.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for your service. I really appreciate the work that you do in the city. I just want to respond one thing to the commissioner, who I think it was Commissioner Javendale. You're incorrect in stating that there's no longer social distancing required if you wear a mask. I know, and I'm probably quoting you incorrectly, but I'm looking at the Alameda County Health Department website, and it says specifically that even with a face covering, that people outside walking, bicycling, running, still required to practice social distancing and other measures. So now I'd like to just tell you about my personal experience. And I got on this call originally to advocate for closing off some streets. And the reason for that is I have been walking for exercise every day since shelter in place started. And the biggest problem that I have is, as a walker, is people who are running and not getting out of the way. They're the ones moving faster. They come up behind you, you're surprised. They come around the corner, you're surprised. And some of them are quite considerate, and others are not. If you turn the streets into stay to the right or stay to the left, you're going to have that same problem. If you have runners and walkers on the same side, so I would, if you're not going to close streets, which I think would be actually really great, if you would close some streets, I hope that you will consider some option, some way to help educate people more than they are right now. I know that runners are not going to want to wear masks. I don't blame them one little bit. But if they can stay away from the walkers, it's just nerve-wracking being out there trying to get your exercise walking. that's basically all I wanted to say, and I thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Richard B. Go ahead,
Yes.
Richard.
I strongly oppose any action by the city that would close off streets to local traffic and install barricades. I walk about 2 miles daily on Albany streets of varying sizes and shapes. Traffic has been dramatically reduced since the county shelter-in-place order took effect, and I have witnessed the spirit of shared space among pedestrians, bicyclists, and cars. Voluntary compliance with social distancing is working just fine. Closing streets and erecting barricades to change behavior is a fool's errand. Drivers will largely ignore such restrictions. Any enforcement would tax the resources of police and fire at the worst possible time. At times, drivers will find themselves proceeding down the wrong side of the street. The barricades and signage will impair drivers' field of vision, potentially putting pedestrians and bicyclists in harm's way. It must be said that the credibility of this commission in making recommendations regarding street closures is highly suspect. Just in the past year, the commission moved unanimously to have the city suspend enforcement of a controlling state law prohibiting parking on the wrong side of the street, one that protects against head-on collisions. The recommendation was resoundingly repudiated by the Albany police chief. At the same time, cities such as San Bruno were warning drivers against this very danger. The commission, whose name was, appropriately enough, was recently stripped of the word safety, is no stranger to burdening residents with radical reconfiguration of the streets and punitive driving schemes over strong community opposition. The staff notes for the meeting contain the ominous warning. Whether these changes are temporary depend on a number of factors that are difficult to predict at this time. In the coming months, further commission discussion of longer post-shelter changes in transportation can be scheduled. This suggests the commission's long-term strategy may be to prolong any street shutdown, perhaps until a vaccine is available, which could be years away. There is an old saying, never let a crisis go to waste. Here, the commission may be using COVID-19 as a pretext to advance a radical agenda to remake the streets and neighborhoods of Albany to satisfy a narrow band of constituents that it marches in lockstep with. Thank you.
All righty, thank you for your comments. Dan Johnson?
Hi, can you hear me? This is Dan.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. I think these are great suggestions by Commissioner McCroskey. Thank you for your leadership, Mr. McCroskey. I didn't see any ideas from anyone else to address this situation. A lot of excuses for not doing anything. But y'all should know that people are taking their own actions on this. I look down my street and I see people sitting in lawn chairs in the street with their own cones around them. So like whether the commission and the council take leadership or not, people are going to do their own stuff. So if you want to lend your expertise and service or shape what happens, this is your opportunity. If you want to abstain from leadership, then that's a choice too. But thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Okay, back to the commission. Thoughts, comments?
There's a couple more hands.
Oh, there's more. I'm sorry. Back to public comment. Amy, go ahead.
Unmute myself. There we go. Okay. The gentleman 2 speakers previous was saying that they would close, that the city would close streets. No one would close streets. The only thing that would change was for any residential street, there would be fewer motorists using their road as a thoroughfare. We would all be able to go in and out of our streets just as we can. We could go to the supermarket, or if we have to go to work, or whatever we have to do, and it would just open it up, facilitating safe travels for other people on bike, foot, wheelchair, skates, and skateboards. I do like Commissioner McCroskey's proposal of the Masonic lane. I think that would really help because the Albany Greenway is too crammed. I'll never walk on it or ride on it. There's just too many people and it's impossible to have social distance. So I think that would be a very helpful solution. As someone who walks a lot and I walk kind of for social reasons to get myself out of the house, I have experienced that motorists drive faster on east-west streets. I think because they're a little wider, they don't have maybe they don't seem quite as, quote, residential to people. So I would think that Washington or Portland would be appropriate streets, east-west streets to close to through traffic. Again, everyone who lives there will be able to do exactly what they want, but there would just be a little through traffic stop. Like Emeryville did this to Doyle Street, which is a pretty busy street, but they closed through traffic, closed Doyle Street to through motorist traffic. Everyone that walks doesn't necessarily walk with someone that's in their own household. I have a friend that's my walking buddy, and when we walk, one of us will walk in the street and one of us will walk on the sidewalk because that's the only way we can walk and catch up. And if I'm walking up Solano to go somewhere, maybe I'll run into someone else that's going the other way. Then one of us will run into the street, and that's my social time. I'm pretty much locked in my house. I don't have work, so that's my social time, is taking a walk. And so being able to actually converse with someone from 6 feet away is really important because, to be honest, I'm going stir crazy, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I see my next door neighbor who's a 93-year-old guy. He takes his walk. Today I was coming back and there was the woman across the street I ran into her when she was taking a walk. So we walked back together, one of us on the street and one of us on the sidewalk. So, I mean, this walking within 6 feet is really important because this isn't going to end next week. This isn't going to end next month. This is kind of a long-ish term life change that we're going to have. So I hope that you'll take this seriously for the health and safety of all of us, and consider closing an east-west street as well as the treatment on Masonic, or creating a walking lane on cones. I believe they're doing that in Alameda, creating a walking lane with cones on a major street, just something that would give people a little more safety walking in the street, because a lot of us, that's kind of what we have to do. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Clay Larson? I think you're muted. I'm not sure if I can unmute you. Clay? Clay? It's showing you as muted, Clay.
I couldn't unmute him.
And I can't unmute him either. Clay, can you unmute on your end? The mute button is on my screen, it's in the bottom left-hand corner.
Might also work to hold the space bar.
Oh, Clay, there you go.
All right, I'm sorry it took so long. Must be the bottom left corner of a Mac though. Yeah, I sent a letter, an email. I anticipated this to be a more general discussion, so my comments are kind of framed for that. I didn't comment, but I will comment. This does appear to be, again, a solution in search of a problem. And I agree with Commissioner Jordan's comment that we need data. I think we've needed data for a long time in terms of our active transportation planning, our bicycle planning. I think I walk frequently in the western part of Albany. I think all the traffic now is local traffic. Today, I visited the Albany Greenway. A 6-foot distance was no problem. The 60-foot distance was easily doable. It wasn't crowded at all. So I'm not sure I haven't visited the high school area. Perhaps that coning off would be appropriate there. It's not appropriate for the Albany Greenway. So I think this is one time when we can be comfortable doing nothing. All right, that's my comment.
Great, thank you. All righty, any other public comment? If you want to raise your hand on the application there, I'm not seeing any more. So we will go ahead and turn it back to the commission. So commissioner comments. Preston?
So one on the general topic of, I guess it's framed as street closure, which maybe is an unfortunate way to phrase it, but making streets not through streets. One question I have is how are Oakland and other cities that are doing that handling liability? I mean, if they present that they're putting up these semi-barriers in order to facilitate people being able to walk in the street, I mean, if somebody gets hit in the street on one of those blocks, then the city is going to bear some liability. So I'm kind of baffled by that aspect of the situation.
I don't know.
Are you looking for a response from staff on that?
I guess, I mean, it's sort of a point, sort of a question. I mean, other cities are doing this, but I just don't understand how the liability will work. I mean, maybe if they're representing it as, you know, we're gonna reduce traffic on these streets for people who are biking. Well, people are allowed to legally bike in the street, so they would seem to incur less liability there than if they say you can use a scooter, you can walk, you can, you know, anything other than biking, which is not really allowed in the street by the vehicle code.
I think, well, I saw Commissioner Javandal raised his hand and he has more
Right.
expertise.
Just to share with you, and this is not coming from my perspective as an employee in the city of Berkeley, but from a number of webinars that I've been on this week, and Justin, you may have heard some of these as well. There are other cities that have been in this conversation about what things can be done that have significant concerns about that liability. So I think Commissioner Jordan's right that that isn't something we can necessarily just ignore, at least in terms of what some other cities are doing. Some clearly are moving ahead, and I don't know what the conversations with their attorneys have been, but I've certainly heard from other cities who have had a lot of concerns raised by their attorneys. So I don't know where we stand on that.
If I may, I live not far away from 42nd Street in Oakland and have visited a couple times in the last week just to see how it's going. And that's a fairly dense neighborhood. I think a density very similar to our neighborhoods here in Albany. And the observation I've seen is that the people who are using it are families, usually with young kids. They are out in the street. I was there yesterday at 5:30 or so. There was 4, 5, 6 people per block probably at that time of day, and strollers and kids on bicycles, but there were also cars. And I saw a lot of nervous parents kind of looking over their shoulder as their kid kind of wobbles up the street on their bicycle. And so it wasn't I don't know that it was particularly relaxing for the parents. I think the kids were having a great time. 42nd Street is, for the serious cyclists, is probably not a route that they would take unless they're going someplace very specific. 40th is a more direct route to a BART station or in Reville or things like that. So I didn't see it used by whoever might be commuting at this point in time. Not many of them, but nonetheless, that was my anecdotal observations on the 2 days that I've been there.
Other commissioner comments? Go ahead, Fred.
Just wanted to comment, to be clear, I wasn't speaking against Ken's ideas. I like his ideas. I'm just kind of advocating for checking our ability and resources to implement before we set an expectation of what we can do. To that end, I think that the idea for the bulb would be relatively easy. The cones for the other ones, again, I don't know what the answer is to that. And to be clear, just kind of looking at quoting the Berkeley health officer, face coverings are not a substitute for staying home, staying 6 feet apart, and washing your hands regularly. So I hope no one took my comments to imply that masks would absolve us of everything else. That's not the case. but they're the county health order, and what's stated in the AC alert is that you're also required to wear them, meaning masks, during essential activities like going for a run or walk outdoors when unable to social distance at least 6 feet from others. Another note from the Berkeley health officer was that strenuous activities like running and bicycling cause people to expel airborne particles more forcefully, which makes the usual minimum of 6 feet distance less adequate. And looking at some of the information that's come through on a number of the webinars that I've participated in the last week or two, the recommendations, for example, for bike spacing increases with speed. So standing and walking 6 feet may be enough, but by the time you're biking 10 miles an hour or more, the recommendations climb to 25 feet or more spacing, following distance, not lateral distance. So I think we want to be careful about the information we put out, and anything that we state officially or publish should come with all the caveats along the lines of the ones I just mentioned, to be sure that we don't inadvertently give people false sense of confidence or otherwise mislead them. I think to Commissioner Jordan's comment about data and speed, and Jeff, what you mentioned about the parents looking nervous about the cars on the street, residents are still going to be driving on the streets, and we kind of need to know, what speed they're going, and whether there's anything that could be done to deal with that if we're going to be putting people in the street. But more to Ken's point, if you're putting people in the parking lane, that's less of a risk. And so I think that that's why I like the kinds of things that Ken recommended. And really my only question relating to those is, what's our capacity to implement? Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other, okay, Preston?
Yeah, I think besides the bulb idea, because it seems simpler to implement, maybe going ahead with the caveat of whatever process the city staff thinks would need to occur as a part of that. The other ideas of, use the left sidewalk, that's something that could just be in the city's e-news. So that's just a messaging concept. I mean, it could get elaborate with signs on the street and whatnot, but I think the simplest would be just to put it in e-news if we think that's a good idea. It seems like a good idea to me. I've also heard and maybe anecdotally seen that, that there's more people riding bikes on the sidewalk now than I'm used to. And again, I don't have any data. Getting data on that's, not necessarily easy, but without data, it might be reasonable to also include messaging of, hey, now's a great time to ride in the street. And if you have children you think are of an age where they're approaching being able to learn to ride in the street, there's not going to be any better time than now for you to give it a try. And you'll be doing your neighbors a solid favor by not riding on the sidewalk. So give it a try. So I'd ask the commission for its thoughts on those ideas of messaging in the e-news. And, if there's support, maybe we could get that done.
I like everything that Ken mentioned. The stay to the left, I think that I understand the reason to have people stay to the left, but I feel like stay to the right seems more natural since you drive on the right and you tend to the right. So, I don't have strong feelings either way, but I think right just seems more natural. I do like the Masonic cones. I think that is a good use of that space. Given how long, I agree that we have to get city comment and this is going to take a while, but we don't know how long we're going to be, in this sort of situation. So getting going on whatever we need to do to notice, and I guess it would have to come back to the Traffic or Transportation Commission and then go to city. I think getting the ball rolling on that. The cones around the high school, I understand that, but I think that seems like maybe a later phase. I guess if I were to rank them, I like the Masonic more than that. But that's just my preference. And the bulb idea I think was great. Was great too. So, Robert, you're muted.
I agree. The bulb seems like the easiest one to put to implement with some signage and messaging. I thought if there was one place to try the coning off of the parking lane, I think Masonic makes more sense to me than around the high school. I think there's not a lot of cars, or there's more cars parked in the residential areas now and less movement of them. And I'm thinking that on Carmel, is that Carmel? Yeah, Carmel, there may be more cars parked there and the parking impact would be greater around the high school or around that the Memorial Park block on that leg than on Masonic. And I think I agree with Fareed. It's contingent upon what staff's abilities to carry this out. But I do see it as an opportunity. I think there's real opportunity right now. You know, aside from what's warranted and what would be needed to make streets safer, there is an opportunity to just take parts of the street that are traditionally for vehicles and use them for other purposes.
Okay, any other comments? Commissioner comments? Okay.
So are
go
we
ahead.
to the point of making some kind of recommendation or resolution?
I believe so, yes.
Well, let me try. We recommend that the city consider giving people direction as to traveling on the sidewalks in terms of direction for direction, yeah. And additionally, direction on the bulb for using the main paths in a directional manner to prevent challenges to social distancing. In more of a phase 2, we're very interested in exploring splitting up traffic by utilizing the eastern parking strip on Masonic and giving more space to people going north and south on the Greenway. And maybe a phase 3 would be to explore expanding the space around the Albany High and Memorial Park block by using the parking strip. Anybody want to add to that?
I'll second.
Okay, and I think, oh, go ahead, Robert.
The signals going on recall,
Yeah.
is that a staff decision or is that something the commission would want to include?
Let's deal with that one separately. I have a little bit of discussion on that one. Okay.
Okay. So we have any other commissioner comments on this? Okay, so we have a second. So again, because of only one speaker can be heard at a time on Zoom, if we could have a roll call vote again, so it's clear how people are voting.
Commissioner Javendo,
Aye.
Commissioner Jordan,
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey,
Aye.
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Aye.
Chair Paulson.
Aye. Okay, and then we wanted to move to the second portion of that. Ken, did you?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to bring this up before. I guess I would prioritize the stoplights that coincide with our high priority network. But looking at that map, that's the nexus of where all the stoplights are. So I think maybe we should differentiate between our major crossings that are I'm sorry, not phrasing that very well. So we have some more used paths like the Greenway. So I would prioritize having constantly recalled walking periods on the Greenway stoplights. You know, San Pablo can be highly walked, especially across Solano, but then you're dealing with Caltrans. So I guess I wouldn't prioritize those.
Freed?
I think that sounds pretty reasonable. The crossings with the Greenway are going to be where we get a lot of pedestrian traffic. That makes good sense to me. Leaving off San Pablo, not just because of Caltrans, but because of the 72 bus lines. Unnecessary pedestrian calls that are automatic when there's no pedestrians or cross traffic is just going to slow down transit, which transit's suffering enough right now. We don't need to add to the woes.
If I can just jump in,
Yeah.
just to keep the commission kind of focused on the agenda item. This was really initially about physical distancing.
Okay.
And modifying signals is something we can bring back to you. We also, there are technical aspects to this that we should probably bring to the commission before you make decisions or recommendations about that.
Okay. I think that's maybe something we talk about at a future for the next meeting. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay. Okay. So, Preston?
I should have, and I didn't jump in time to amend that last motion to, so I'll move to ask staff to consider messaging regarding people cycling in the street rather than on sidewalks.
Should we just do a show of hands if everybody is in favor of that? If you're in favor, raise your hand. Okay, so it seems like everybody has voted to amend our resolution.
I'll give it a second if it needs it.
Okay, the second after the thought, yeah. Okay, so I think that we're ready then to move on to the next item on the agenda, and just a time check, it is 9:16. So let's see if we can power through here. Item 6, announcements.
Thank you, Chair. The main announcement was just letting you know, as the now Transportation Commission, the Muni Code changes have gone into effect with the new purpose and other elements, which was included in the agenda packet. And I was just going to note the one item that was added at the council, which I don't have in front of me, but there was a duty F that was added that re-emphasized, I think it was stated in the purpose, but re-emphasizing within the duties to consider equity and accessibility within your actions or within your decisions. So that was the one change I think that was made after you had made your recommendation. And the other announcement I was going to make was for our public works projects, facilitating them going on to council. We're considering having the next meeting, the May 28th meeting, a week earlier, May 21st. That's a weird start of the month, affecting how quickly the turnaround from the commission meeting would have been to the next council meeting. So wanted to put that out there, and I'll send a follow-up email to see if folks are available, if we would have a quorum for that, but wanted to note that now since that came up this week.
Okay. Any other announcements, Ken?
Just wanted to mention 2 things. One, just like car repair, bike repair and sales are an essential according to our government, and local bike shops are basically open for the most part, but call first, check their website. They're not all open. The Safe Routes to School program has gone somewhat virtual, and they're offering some trainings online. And Bike East Bay has gone online with its trainings. All those are free. You can look them up on the Alameda County Safe Routes to School website, the Bike East Bay education website, or if you look up the Albany Strollers and Rollers last issue of Greenways, we have a whole rundown of tips and tricks for riding in the pandemic, and information specifically about all the bike shops and the training programs. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other announcements? Okay, we'll move on to item 7, future agenda items. So I think that we wanted to, the signals that the pedestrian signal issue, I think that's something folks want to hear about next time. Masonic, the cones on Masonic, I think folks wanted, if we could get moving forward with that.
Can we make it a little more broad?
What is your suggestion?
The item tonight was pretty broad that allowed us to talk about a lot of different potential solutions. So maybe we could continue that item.
I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Robert?
Will, I don't know if it's the next meeting or the meeting after, but I assume that there are revenues that are changing for the city in relation to transportation related projects, and also some of our taxes, tax initiatives. And at some point, is there going to be like a reconciliation, or at least a presentation of what the impacts are revenue wise to transportation projects?
The CIP update process has been taking a look at some of those projections. So Public Works staff has been tracking that. Whether they would have information in advance of a upcoming CIP discussion, I don't know, but we can check with them.
Kristen?
That sparked me to remember attending a webinar with Mayor Ari Gein and some other people who were on a panel for Berkeley. They have something called I think it's the Berkeley Carbon Fund or something like that for greenhouse pollution reduction. That potentially involves a number of tax measures that they're thinking of putting on the ballot in November. One that was particularly interesting that I think would be useful to have on the agenda to discuss is a gasoline distribution tax, or a gasoline distributor tax, which would be modeled on the sweetened beverage distributor tax. So essentially the same concept, and particularly given that revenues potentially are going to be declining for transportation, be a way to keep us going on our local transportation infrastructure projects.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, our next meeting will either be the May 28th or May 21st. And it may be at City Hall, or it may be in your living room again. So I'm hoping we're back at City Hall, but we will see. So, and with that,
before we adjourn, I just want to thank Chair Paulson. You did a fabulous job, really, given the radical change in format. You had no idea what you were getting thrown into when we nominated you, so you've done it with great grace. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and thanks staff too for setting this up. And glad you all were here, and hope that you all are doing well. And with that, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you.